Folks, welcome to the next session in Human Resources for Small Business. Today I've got the special pleasure, as usual, with speaking with Paul Maguire. Paul Maguire is the principal lawyer at Maguire Legal. He is the author of HR for Small Business, and I believe that's published by Wiley. Paul specialises in employment and workplace relations. Welcome, Paul, and I'm really excited to hear what you're planning to talk about today.
Thank you, Kevin. A very kind introduction. Yes, that's HR for Small Business for Dummies, and it is published by Wiley, and it's been out for some time. Hopefully you should still be able to purchase it through Wiley's. Now, Kevin, today I wanted to talk about a subject that I often get queries from my clients, again, small business employers, who are in the process of recruiting someone to their business, are concerned that applicants may or may not have a criminal record, and whether in fact it is discrimination, unlawful discrimination.
Very interesting.
To either even ask if they have a criminal record, and if they do, whether they can deny them employment on that particular basis. Again, it's a very sensitive and difficult area, so I thought it would be good to talk about what you can or cannot do.
Excellent. And again, this is primarily around risk mitigation in terms of, obviously, a business employs somebody that's going to be a future problem for the business. Nobody wants that.
That's absolutely right. Yeah. Look, our starting point on this is once again, is the anti-discrimination laws that operate throughout Australia, both at the Commonwealth and state level. Now, I won't bore you with the definition of discrimination, but essentially there's a number of characteristics which most small business employers will be aware that it's unlawful to discriminate in either offering employment or in the treatment of employees once they are employed, and ultimately as to whether they dismissing someone on the basis of a characteristic or trait. So let's look at what the law stands with criminal records. Well, at the moment, there's two states, or one territory and one state. In the Northern Territory and also in Tasmania, it's unlawful to discriminate on the basis of criminal record.
Okay.
However, there are some exceptions to that, Kevin, which we'll go through. But let's start by just quoting. Under the Northern Territory's Anti-Discrimination Act, if you've got a business there or operating a branch out there, it is unlawful to discriminate against a person on the grounds of irrelevant criminal record. I'll get to that in a minute. And also, the Tasmanian Discrimination Act has similar provisions. Person must not discriminate against another person on the basis of irrelevant criminal record. Now, there is a number of exemptions to that, but let's just talk about, as I hear you probably ask, well, what is irrelevant criminal record? Well, irrelevant criminal record is a range of things. It's a record relating to the arrest, interrogation, or criminal proceedings where further action is not taken, the charge has not been laid, the charge was dismissed, prosecution was withdrawn, the person was discharged, whether convicted or not, the person was found not guilty. Still in our system, if you're found not guilty here, Kevin. The person's conviction was quashed or set aside. They're given a pardon. The circumstances relating to the offence which the person was convicted are not directly relevant to the situation in which the discrimination arises, or the charge or conviction was expunged.
Okay.
So what I'm leading to in that, Kevin, is that it's certainly unlawful in Tasmania and the Northern Territory to discriminate on the basis of a criminal record, but it's very much qualified to this concept of irrelevant criminal record. So, in other words, yes to the question, can I discriminate? Is it unlawful to discriminate, to not offer employment, or if I discover after employment, subsequently dismiss on the basis of a criminal record? Well, the answer is, well, yes, you can. But again, there's elements of that we need to discuss.
Yeah, and I'd love to hear some examples.
Yeah, okay.
Some examples, I'd love to.
All right. Well, look, we'll probably deal with the exceptions in state and federal law because ultimately the decision whether you can discriminate in offering or not offering employment really depends on the inherent requirements of the position, the circumstances of that particular job. Now, there are some express, very clear exceptions that operate in state federal law, such, for example, the teaching services, gaming and racing, nursing, police, health, transport operators, security officers, taxi driving, correctional services, and even the legal profession. Yes, Kevin, the legal profession.
Okay, yeah.
Some say we're all crooks, but anyway. And second-hand dealers and pawnbrokers. So there's certainly some very clear exceptions where it's in fact important to discriminate based on criminal record in those areas. Another concept is this thing of spent criminal record.
Okay.
Yeah.
That sounds interesting. Spent criminal record.
Yeah, well, a spent criminal... Yeah, so if we started off by saying, okay, well, yes, you can discriminate on the basis of criminal record, but with those exceptions and also in those irrelevant convictions. There's also another concept, this spent criminal record. And really what that means is that spent conviction laws allow the criminal records of offenders to be amended after a certain period of time, usually subject to no further convictions.
Right.
Usually about 10 years,
Okay.
5 to 10 years.
5 to
So,
10
look, if you haven't offended within that period, then we will, in fact, that's essentially a spent conviction, and it's no longer something that an employer can say, all right, okay, there's a conviction which I'm entitled to discriminate in relation to offering this job.
Okay.
Very sensitive, very difficult. Often, I suppose I say to employers, look, if a person if they have a spent criminal record, they haven't offended, do you want to give them a go? I mean, it's very difficult to get a job if you're leaving prison, for example. What sort of work is available in order for you to re-enter, rehabilitate into society? Now, that's probably just, the virtue signalling side of me saying that, but it's often, I think, important for employers to think carefully about whether criminal record is relevant, and particularly with spent ones.
And what you mentioned before about the inherent requirements of a particular job would be very much considered in the notion of providing somebody with an opportunity to for employment. For instance, they may have had a history with a criminal record in possibly theft of cash, and the job you're recruiting them for, there's no cash handling, there's no money transfers happening. So you would imagine in that circumstance, the inherent requirements of the job quite different, and therefore the person could be a good employee.
Yes, yeah. Well, that brings to mind that great scene of the movie Chopper, where Chopper is asking for the money, and the other character says, "Cash? There's no cash here. Here, no cash." Now, I wouldn't imagine we'll be employing Chopper anyway. He's departed now, but nevertheless, it's a good point you raise. Is that we need to think about the position. If you've been convicted of a fraud, theft, and so forth, and the position that they're applying for is a responsible one handling money, well, clearly an inherent requirement of that job is honesty in managing and handling money. So in that sense, you can, in fact, discriminate lawfully on the basis of the inherent requirement of that job.
Yeah.
However, if I'm entering into a job which might be, say, for example, a cleaning job, or I might be working as in the kitchen in a restaurant, and say, look, all right, yeah, I've had some offences in the past, there's a criminal record's been disclosed. Well, it may well be, depending upon the nature of that, it may have been in your youth, a spent conviction. You usually won't find out about the spent conviction, but they may disclose it, say, look, it was in a fight at the football or something. Well, you just need to make a decision about whether, in fact, has this person's character sufficiently okay to employ them in that role, because clearly an inherent requirement of working in a kitchen doesn't necessarily mean you need to be the best person. obviously there's exceptions, many exceptions, and I think I read them out before. And that is that if you're dealing with vulnerable people, disabled people, mentally ill or otherwise, then you need to be a little bit more careful about defining what that inherent requirement is.
Thanks.
I'll probably add really one other element to all of this, and that is that the manner in which this information is handled, Kevin. It's increasingly important in our society is that we manage information that lands in our hands as employers sensitively and often confidentially. I'm often also asked about, well, how does the privacy laws impact this? Well, any issues around criminal record, I would have thought is generally a sensitive area, certainly an area which you need to be, I think, maintain the confidentiality of associated with the process that you're undertaking. So in other words, if you're recruiting someone to a job and you've called them an interview, or you have a CV, or you have written information which you've acquired from a police check, then it's not something you walk straight out onto the factory floor or out into the hospitality restaurant floor and say, hey, I've just got this application from Paul Maguire, and gee, did you know that he's got these convictions? It's important to protect that privacy. You don't want to end up getting a claim against you that you've breached that privacy in that area. So treat it sensitively.
Yeah, that's it's an interesting point you raise in terms of the employer or the potential employer does a criminal check. Can I ask, it's inappropriate to ask a candidate or an interviewee whether they're married, whether they've got children or planning to have children. Can you ask somebody, do you have a criminal record?
Well, the answer is yes, you can. It's a great question because often people are very reluctant because they're unsure. Look, the principle is this. You can ask many things. It's what you do with that information that is the important element as to whether that is considered unlawful discrimination. I would only ask it if it's relevant to the job. That's really it in a nutshell. Don't ask things that aren't relevant. And certainly, as we know, there's certain characteristics that we've should be fully aware that you wouldn't even go near. Okay, it's all about the job. If you've got a job description, you centre on the selection criteria.
Yes,
and if criminal record or other elements is relevant to that, then ask it. In fact, you should.
Indeed. All right. Now, Paul, if I may ask a few questions here, you mentioned early on in the podcast about the legislation in the Northern Territory and also Tasmania. What about Victoria, New South Wales, Queensland, etc.? Is there some legislation in those states?
Look, the answer is no. Under the anti-discrimination laws in each of those states, and even at the federal level, there is no express prohibition on unlawful discrimination in the offering of or employment or ending employment, for that matter, based on criminal record. What it relies upon is this idea is that if you, it could be unfair to dismiss one, it could be adverse action under the Federal Fair Work Act, for example, if you dismiss someone for a criminal record if it's not relevant to the inherent requirements of the position. So it's an indirect route towards that. There may, in fact, be some of the exceptions, in fact, probably all of those exceptions I read out early on. There will be particular provisions either in the regulations or the legislation governing, for example, taxi driver licences, areas of offering employment in health-related areas, disability, mental health facilities and so on. They'll have codes of conduct, regulation standards and so forth, which will may be relevant to those particular areas. Childcare, another one as well. So you would have to look beyond the anti-discrimination laws and look at the particular industry to find, well, what's the regulation in regard to this particular issue.
Very interesting indeed. Some of the takeaways, I guess, when we think about the discussion today, it's really looking at where the law meets reality, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
It's a reality out there that there are lots of people with a criminal record, whether it's current or spent.
Or irrelevant.
or irrelevant, indeed. And these people are applying for jobs and potentially applying for a job at your business. And